On today's edition of Stories from Real Life with Melvin E. Edwards, our guest for this episode is Moira Mills. Moira Mills is a lifelong unschooler, road schooling mom, and founder of Soul Path Branding. Raised off-grid in Alaska and never formally schooled, she now helps families and entrepreneurs unlearn the systems that don't fit and build something better.
So then it comes to this concept of being authentic. But the world has been telling us our entire lives that your authenticity is actually not what we want. Please make it look acceptable to what we're all told it's supposed to look like. So it's a really challenging thing, but I think it starts with a conversation about it and acknowledging society does tell us to be unique, but it doesn't really actually allow that to happen.
Let's join this conversation with unschooling advocate Moira Mills.
You are listening to Stories from Real Life, a podcast by engaging storytellers for engaged story listeners. Here's your host, author and journalist, Melvin E. Edwards.
Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Thanks for joining me for the podcast where personal stories can have a global impact. As you heard in the intro, our guest today is unschooling advocate Moira Mills. Moira, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So before we begin, can you explain to the audience what unschooling means and how it's different from traditional homeschooling?
Yes. So the biggest difference is that it's another term that you'll hear is self-led or child-led education. So instead of the education being determined from the outside in or from the parent down, the education is determined from inside the child, meaning that what the child is interested in are the avenues that you follow. You, of course, find the subjects within those, but it's coming from something that the child's interested in learning instead of fixating on tests and like textbook learning.
Okay, so what was it like for you growing up unschooled on a homestead in Alaska?
So,
first of all, before you answer, what do you grow in Alaska, or what do you raise in Alaska? That's really what I'm curious.
So a lot of root vegetables, all of the fruits, a lot of the berries, so raspberries, blueberries. We had currants. We had a lot of potatoes, strawberries, and then just a lot of the root vegetables, carrots and peas. I swore when I was a kid that if I ever had a garden when I grew up, all I was going to grow were peas and carrots because that's what I enjoyed eating as they grew. You know, you don't have to wait to the end of the season. You get to pluck them through the summer. So.
And that's Forrest and Jenny, like peas and carrots.
Yes.
So what was unschooling like in that environment?
So, it's one of these things where when you grow up in it, you just think it's normal because it's the way life is. And then it was really getting into my 20s and moving out and doing a lot of traveling throughout the world that I think it was really in having my son in my early 30s that I look back and really appreciated how different it was. So basically, I lived life very similar to how I live life as an adult, or all of us live, where I follow the things that interest me. I was very interested in making money. I wanted financial independence. So I was very young when I started thinking about how I could make my own money so I could have control of what I did and when I did it. I wanted to buy my own clothes because there were certain clothes that I want to wear. And the deal was, if I could afford them, then I could buy them. So I was always thinking about business and how to make income and just following the things that interested me. So I never had to wake up and sit in front of down with a textbook. I was out in the garden. I was raising animals. So the deal was, as a child, I could have any animal that I wanted, but I had to pay for it. I had to figure out how to pay for it, and it had to produce something. So I couldn't have a horse because a horse can't help a lot in Alaska. And I settled on wool sheep. because I wanted an animal that would produce something without that something being its life all the time. So I just was very focused on how can I make enough money to afford this? How can I make money with it and to maintain the costs? So all the details around that was pretty much my whole childhood. I mean, there was a lot of stuff around helping around the house and keeping the gardens. That was not my thing, but keeping the gardens going. But when I wasn't doing that, then I was just focused on how to create my own independence or maintain my own independence more.
Okay. So how did becoming a mother shift the way you thought about education and freedom?
Okay. So, when I moved away from home when I was 17. And then I spent my 20s doing everything that I thought I had missed out on or that I thought would make me feel more normal. And so I did a lot of traveling. I had a lot of different experiences. And then when I decided to have my son, it was a very intentional decision. I was 30, I guess I was 31, 32. And I was like, okay, well, let's look at the world around childhood. Where is it now? Because my whole 20s, I didn't have anything to do with kids. I really had not. I had no clue kind of where things were. And I was living in New York at the time. I was in Brooklyn. And so that's just a very different culture from Alaska. So I was just taking stock on where is childhood now. And I noticed that there was a lot of more private tutors and classes that the kids were part of. And that was so different from my experience. And when I was a kid, the term unschooling was coined in the late 70s, but people weren't really using it when I was a kid. It was all lumped under homeschool. And it wasn't until I kind of came back and revisited things that I realized that the unschooling had gotten far more popular in the last 20 years. So then looking at where childhood was and recognizing there were so many experiences that I had as a child that most children didn't have exposure to, and how I wanted to create those opportunities for my son. I always knew that I wanted him to be very comfortable in a massive city and also in the middle of nowhere. I wanted him to feel very comfortable in lots of different areas. And so then I decided that I needed to create some of those because kids today didn't have access to them as much. So then that was kind of the start of that portion of my path.
Okay. So what is it you think most parents get wrong when they try to, quote, do school differently?
So I think that there's a lot of families that never consider doing homeschool until something happens. Like maybe their kid is being bullied in school. Maybe they're not happy with the curriculum. There's many different reasons that families decide to leave that system. And generally, there's a lot of families that know that's the angle that they want to do from the very beginning. But there's a lot of families that never consider that until it's a decision to be made like now. And what I was seeing a lot is a lot of stress being created because they're trying to recreate the public school in their home. Like set up a room, turn it into a classroom, have the textbooks, wake their kids up at the same time, have them get dressed and go sit in this room like they were in a school. And not that that is inherently bad, but I was seeing a lot of stress and families feeling like they're at each other's throat all the time. So the parents are exhausted because they're trying to force their kids to do school, and the kids listen to parents differently than they listen to teachers. They're in a different environment. They're not in a classroom, so they're at home. There's a lot of different stressors, but people were just really struggling and very unhappy and questioning why they made the decision in the first place. So for me, the number one thing that we all need to do as adults is essentially detox. The term is called deschooling, but it's just like a detox. And like we detox anything, there's a process to it. And part of that process can be uncomfortable depending on how quickly, you try to detox, or if you slow it down. But it's a very, very important process to go through. But it's not talked about very much. And generally, it doesn't get talked about until families are kind of at their wits' end and really unhappy, and maybe considering putting their kids back into school, or just feeling very unhappy that their family is just fighting constantly and there's no peace in the house.
All right. So why does deschooling the parents matter more than the curriculum?
So we all have conditioning from the world around us, right? So there are ideas that we have that, not that they're good or bad, but we have to get down to the assumption behind the idea. And so when we have our understanding, say a parent has been through 13 years of education and then went into university and done any degree after that, there's even more. So there's an idea of what learning needs to look like. Whether that worked for them a lot, because you hear a lot of stories about adults that were miserable in school. It didn't work for them and they weren't happy. But there's still an idea that education still has to look this way. So we still have to be forced through this system. And so really being able to stop and say, what's the foundation of what's the fundamental principles of how learning happens? Let's get back to that. Let's have a discussion about that. Let's detox how we think it needs to look. And then once we get down to the foundational pieces, then we can rebuild something different. We could rebuild exactly the same thing if that's a fit for us, or we can, envision it very differently. But learning, we're designed to want to learn. And learning happens all the time, just living in the world and interacting with the people around us. So being able to recognize where those assumptions are, get down to them, and then have a discussion. And as adults, we have 20, 30, 40, 50 years of conditioning that things need to be a certain way, where a child has a lot less of that, right? Like 5 or 6-year-old, they imagine like all of these things that as adults, we've decided that those things are not possible or they're not realistic or whatever. Kids don't have all of those rules in place. And they're much closer to that time where they think that all things are possible and that like the world is this amazing, beautiful place. So it's easier to kind of go through the layers for kids, where as adults, we get a little more, sometimes a lot more rigid but it has to look this way.
All right. So can you share a story about how understanding your child's human design changed your own parenting?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so just a little bit of overview over what human design is. It synthesizes many ancient texts from different cultures. So it brings forward what has been studied in human nature for centuries. So from the Chinese, the I Ching, which is from China, the Kabbalah, which is the mystic side of Judaism, astrology. Specifically, I do one that pulls from sidereal astrology, which is what they do in India, not what we do generally here in the U.S. So it's based on what's actually happening in the sky. So it gives a blueprint of kind of how our personality is here and why we're here on this planet. So my desire to learn more about it came from this thinking that I don't think that we're here just to get a job, to make money, to pay bills. I just feel like there's more to why we're here. And this just really resonated with me. And an example of how it's worked with my son and I is that he makes decisions very differently than I do. So I have something called sacral authority, and I can make decisions pretty quickly. My body, if presented with an idea, my body pretty much is like very clear if it's something I'm interested in. And when I make a decision to take on a project from that place, I maintain my energy. Like I have the energy to work on it 24/7, and never give up on it. If I'm doing something because I feel like I'm supposed to, there's some should, but I don't really care about it, I don't have the energy and it's like drudgery. So I'm not interested. My son also has that knowing in his body, but he is an emotional authority, which just means he needs a little more time. He needs a little more time to feel more neutral about a situation before jumping in. So a really good example of this is we travel the country full time. So we put a lot of miles on. And we had just driven for Christmas from Charleston, South Carolina to Lexington, Kentucky for a couple weeks to visit friends. But that was, 20 hours of driving round trip, basically, maybe a little bit more. And we got back to Charleston and it was cold. This last winter, it snowed there, which I thought we were heading far enough south to not have snow. And then we looked outside and there was 2 inches of snow and I went, this is okay. We didn't go far enough south, obviously. So we had the opportunity to go visit some friends in South Florida, which sounded really appealing. We both got really excited about that. And I knew I was ready to drive more, but I gave him a little more time. So we talked about it at night. He was super excited about doing it. And I knew to give him a little bit of time because he was envisioning, being on the beach and being able to get in the water still and not thinking about, yes, but it's still like a 5 or 6 hour drive. Do we really want to be in the car again for that long? And I gave him that time. And the next morning, the first thing he said, like, not even good morning, Mom. It was, I don't want to do that drive, Mom. Like, I'm so tired from driving. Like, let's not. So the night before, he was super excited. And if I had committed, okay, great, like, let's do this. If I had treated him like me and thought he's very clear now, I would have made the plans. We would have gotten the truck early in the morning and we'd already be on the road. And just looking back at other situations where we had pushed through to do that before I understood that he just needs a little bit of time, it probably would have been a much more challenging drive than either of us really wanted to do. So instead, we stayed in Charleston. We enjoyed the weather. And we were both a little happier. So when we did end up going south, we were more relaxed and it was overall a much more enjoyable trip. So it's an example of I'm very clear that I can make quick decisions. I know if I'm kind of into it or not very quickly. And I need to just give him even a few more hours. Like, just think about it. Like, this is the option. We could do this or this, but like, think on it, sleep on it. And when he does, and he feels more neutral about something, then when he decides that, yes, it's something that I want to do, he also maintains his energy for it. And so it's not like we avoid the things just because they're challenging, but when we have energy to like deal with what comes up because we're more centered when we make the decision, then things will just flow easier. So that I feel like is a really good example of we're very similar in many ways, but this little place, being able to understand this makes our life run much smoother.
Okay. So what does it really mean to build a business that's aligned with who you are, but how do you know when you're not aligned with that business?
So I think it takes a lot of introspection and self-awareness and taking the time to become self-aware of who we are, not who the world tells us we're supposed to be, but who are we on a soul level, on a base level of why am I here on this planet? What's my journey? What's my purpose here? And so then when we're building something out of that, it's not just coming from, well, the world told me that this is what success looked like. So I need to recreate this, 20-step process that worked for this other person to create this life that's successful. And how many times have we gotten the thing that we think we want, and then we realize we're still not totally happy? Like, it didn't really bring us that happiness. And not that any of those things are bad or wrong, but the more that we can have self-awareness for who we are and really what matters to us, not what matters to the world, then we can build something. Like this word being authentic is, it's a really popular word now. Just be authentic. But what does that even mean? Like, who are we? Because authentic to you is very different from authentic to me. And it's not something that you can you can feel it from the outside, but it's not something, the same recipe for how you get there is not the same for all of us. And then we can have businesses that are really aligned with really bringing forth what we're here to bring to the world. And so focus coming from the inside out versus starting with these outside metrics of, but it has to look like this.
Okay, so how does human design help someone become a better parent, partner, or business owner?
So the more that we can understand ourselves, I look at it as being like when you're on a plane, they tell you to put your oxygen on first. So we can't really conceptualize how someone can be different from us if we don't understand ourselves on some level. And it's not like, it's a lifelong pursuit. It's not something that happens overnight. But the more that we can understand ourselves and appreciate and value that and the process of finding it out, then we can see that in other people so much clearer. Like the more I respect my own kind of little nuances of how I am, then I can see how my son is so different from me in so many ways and really appreciate that and not feel like I have to make him, a copy of me or a copy of this like ultimate vision of what, someone is supposed to be like.
All right, so how do you use human design to help entrepreneurs find clarity in their brand and voice?
So we start with looking at who you are as an individual. So there's different energy types. There are people that do really well at having an idea about something and initiating that idea. Like it's like everything they touch just turns to gold, right? Like they have this idea and then somehow it's built and it's been created. And then there's others, I will include myself in the others, where I really struggle. I have lots of ideas about things, but I really struggle if I try to initiate in that way. And if I look back over my life, that's where I've gotten my most of my frustrations, like when I've overthought things. The way I'm designed is more to respond to things. So what that means for me is that a lot of times I'll be out in my life and I will run into someone and be presented, say, with a question, or I meet someone out at dinner and a friend connects us. That's where in my life the gold has happened, where it's like when I put myself in kind of the right place at the right time and I meet the right people, and then collaborations happen from that. So I'm not initiating this idea, I'm meeting people, and then what evolves from that, that's where like my most successful projects have been. Also responding to not my thinking, like my logical thinking, but more like, I think we all have, well, maybe not, but this experience of all of a sudden I just have this like thing that I feel called to go do. So I created a pop-up playground in Albany where we were living when my son was born in New York. And I just knew that I needed, like, this was something to do. But it wasn't initiating and it was this idea that I had. It was more, I just wanted to create the space for kids to play. Basically, a pop-up playground is like creating a junkyard for kids. So the concept comes out of kind of post-World War II Europe, where they would give these bombed out sites to kids to play, but it was like saws and hammers and boxes and like junk, and just let them create. Very different from today's playground where, everything is very manicured, very precise. That was like a very successful project. It got shut down when the lockdowns happened because, everything did. But it wasn't me logically getting there. It was me following a response to something that happened in my life. So going back to the question. So we look at who the person is. There's several different variations of that. And looking at where can we work more with the flow of that energy. Like presenting yourself as can look very different depending on what the different types are. And so Like an example would be a projector, which is a type. They are here as guides. So they see this bigger picture. They are not going to be able to sell. Like if they have a product, they're not going to be able to sell it as well. They're designed to present who they are and how they got to even thinking that this product was a valuable product, right? Like I have this life experience. This is how I got here. And I think that you will like this as much and I can help you, bring this product into your life, however that can be. And that will work very, very well for a certain type of people and not so well for someone else. So there's lots of layers and lots of nuance to a chart, but it's using how each individual person is wired to make decisions and move through the world so that it's kind of like getting in a stream. And if you just get in the stream at the right point, you can just flow down it effortlessly versus like trying to climb up a waterfall can be exhausting. So working with that energy instead of against it. So that kind of brings in this whole concept of quantum physics, and I find it all very fascinating. But who are we and why are we on this planet? And then our life being an effect of that.
Okay, so how does human design relate to soul path branding?
So there's a couple things I do with soul path branding. So I help families and I also help entrepreneurs. So one of the elements that I use is we look at the chart, we bring that into the picture. So one of the things that I noticed a long time ago is that small businesses really struggle with understanding. When you want to start a small business, you get really excited about the thing that you're offering, right? And so it's hard because we have to do all the different elements like the bookkeeping and like the marketing, but it's not necessarily the easiest for us to do. So, some people might really like elements of that and not others. And so how can we use your strengths to build a business and to build a brand? Because especially in this day and age, our brand is online, so they're not meeting us face to face a lot of times. So how are we portraying ourselves online? And there's a whole science behind like what colors elicit from people and what fonts kind of bring out in people. But instead of kind of coming from us all being the same, when we can use human design as the foundation of that, then we can take who is this person, who am I as a person, what's my unique flavor, and then how can we build the brand online that people are coming to meet where it works with that. So the right people get attracted to us. So we're positioning ourselves in a way that the right people can get to us, and we don't have to worry about appealing to everyone. Like because we hear talking about like you have to create a niche, you have to do this, you have to do that. But again, that's all very like great ideas, but how can we actually do that in the day-to-day? We can use the foundation of human design. And then my background is as a rolfer. So a lot of people have never heard of this, but it's a type of body work. It looks at the whole human body as a system. So it's from back in the 60s, 70s. And working with, like a lot of people will feel like their neck is the issue, say example. But sometimes when we step back and we look at the bigger system, the neck is where the pain is showing up, but it's not the root cause of things. So how can we get back to the root cause to help balance the whole system so that when we get up to the top, the neck, or in business, what we're actually portraying to the world, that can be coming from a much more stable foundation. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Okay.
Okay, so this is a little bit of a challenging question, I think.
Yeah.
So if simply, quote, being rather than doing is what's authentic, isn't your brand actually teaching people how to do things a certain way, even if that way is different from the mainstream?
Not necessarily. It's finding where things resonate. So a lot of times, say when we pull a chart, there's a lot of times where people say like, oh, this is how I act, or these are the things, but I've shoved that down feeling like it was bad or wrong in lieu of doing what I feel like I was supposed to be doing. So it's more it's more remembering kind of that core of us and unlearning the stuff that society has put on us. And it's allowing that innate wisdom to come through. So it's not teaching it more, it's getting rid of the resistance. So naturally who we are it's just already there. It doesn't have to be retaught. Does that answer your question?
It does, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how does your experience growing up unschooled help you approach business and marketing differently than most people do?
Well, I just think that, and I have my own conditioning. Like the world conditions us because we're part of this, we're just part of the world. So it's not like I escaped it by any means, but there's a portion of it I didn't get. And so I remember being in my 20s and observing my colleagues or the people around me having like if we look at like what success is, like a very narrow perception of what success is. And I feel like a lot of my conversations were like, well, yes, I mean, that is definitely success, but there's also lots of different ways for success. Success means so much to different people, and there's lots of different options. And so, society can put us on, there's a lot of different things that it can kind of condition. And I feel like, especially moving from rural Alaska to New York and being like, there's actually there's lots of different ways to see this. And also my best friendships have been other people having a very different life experience, saying the same thing to me, like, oh, there's actually a lot of different ways to see this. And I think that that's how we can help support each other in this whole human journey. This is just my kind of flavor of it, that you don't have to. I mean, I never even considered having a boss. I just knew from a very young age that I needed to be an entrepreneur because I needed to tell myself what to do. That was enough. I didn't want somebody else telling me what to do. Yes.
Okay. All right. So I just have a couple of questions left. So what's your take on blending your personal story into your brand, and where do most people get stuck with that?
Well, it's this whole concept of being authentic. I feel like the world tells us to be unique and authentic, but then everything that we're trained to do from birth is to be just like the people next to us, right? So we're fed into this system that says, you have to learn this at this time with everyone else that's your exact same age, and if you don't, there's a failure there. Or if you don't fit into this box, the world is not very accepting, but then they say, don't be in a box. So then it comes to this concept of being authentic. But the world has been telling us our entire lives that your authenticity is actually not what we want. Please make it look acceptable to what we're all told it's supposed to look like. So it's a really challenging thing. But I think it starts with a conversation about it and acknowledging society does tell us to be unique, but it doesn't really actually allow that to happen.
Okay, so as a final question that I always ask my guests, yes. I leave this moment for you to give your final thought or advice on any topic that you want.
Well, I would just say, when you have a hammer, all you see are nails. And when I was a rolfer, it was like every structural thing. It's I think it can help everybody. And it's not the case. It's when it works for someone, it can really work. It's a powerful tool. But if it's not the right fit for the person, maybe it's just not the right time, then it's not a good thing to do. But I think that kind of delving into these deeper questions around why are we here is a super valuable conversation to have. And one of the things that I offer, it's a very complex subject, human design is, but I offer pulling people's charts for free and just giving them a taste of this is kind of your version of this. And if it resonates, amazing. We can always go deeper. If it doesn't, you can let it go, no problem. But I do offer that, and the website is 5minutesoulread.com. And I really enjoy doing that with people to just say, this is a perspective on who you are and why you're here. And if it resonates, go for it. If it doesn't, cool. But at least check it out.
And we'll have a link to that in the show notes.
Thank you.
So our guest today has been entrepreneur and unschooler, Moira Mills. Moira, thank you for being here today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Please go to my website at podcastreallife.com for more information about my guest and the things we discussed today. That's it for today's episode of Stories from Real Life. Join us again next time for another chance to learn from each other. Until then, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Stories from Real Life. Don't forget to subscribe and share. Let's meet right here every Tuesday and Friday. See you then.